He's been following Pavel for a month now. He followed, for real, without retreating a single step. Wherever the guy went, this guy, sooner or later, appeared there. It has become an obsession. They became almost inseparable, like natural satellites of the Earth and the Moon. His tall, lanky figure in a long coat, with a scarf carelessly tied around his thin neck, stood out effectively against the background of the mass of people. Close, the stranger never approached, preferring to keep his distance. At first, Pasha did not attach much importance to this, attributing everything to chance. But, when they began to intersect with a man in a coat almost daily, he became seriously worried. Why this surveillance? What does this guy want from me? The young man thought in confusion. The stranger did not seem to feel any awkwardness from such an annoying intrusion into someone else's life. Pavel even tried to contact the police, but they only twisted his finger at his temple and advised him to watch less TV. What could he tell them? That he's being followed by a guy in a raincoat like Jack the Ripper? An important person, Pasha has never been. He worked as an administrator in a hotel, and in his free time he was fond of photography. This was his only passion and source of additional income. Often, he took work home, processing and developing images in his state-of-the-art laboratory. Bad, in his opinion, he did nothing, so he did not consider himself indebted to anyone. Once, when he was almost used to the lanky fellow who followed him inseparably, something strange happened. Opening the door, on the threshold of the apartment, Pavel found some kind of puddle, reddish in color. Everything around her was covered with unfamiliar scripts, very similar to Latin. Examining the door itself, he noticed a cross painted with white paint and a strange word. "Get out." On the landing, in the corner, he came across a tiny straw figurine of a man, all pierced with sewing needles. The doll vaguely resembled him. Her hair was dyed with soot, as if drawing an analogy with the fact that Pavel was a brunette. What does all of this mean? Why were these items thrown to me? Puzzled Guy thought. From that day on, every morning, another terrible find was waiting for him at the threshold of the house. Now a black cat hanging on a doorknob, now a dead rat without a head, now tufts of hair resembling goat hair. Subconsciously, Pasha understood that the terrible finds were somehow connected with the appearance of a man in a black cloak. He literally hated him for invading his life in such an unceremonious way. More and more often he began to turn around and check for surveillance. One day, opening a mailbox, he heard strange sounds coming from there, reminiscent of fuss, and a low hiss. At the same second, from the cell with the number of his apartment, like a compressed spring, a grinning snake head quickly jumped out and bit him on the arm. He literally felt with his whole being how the poison was rapidly dispersing through the veins and vessels of his body. The writhing, vile reptile crawled up the steps leading to the basement with startling speed. Pavel felt slightly dizzy and nauseous. On stiff, padded legs, he climbed into the apartment and, losing consciousness, collapsed onto the bed. How much time had passed since the bite, he did not know. He woke up when it was already dark outside. He felt much better. He was overcome by a terrible thirst and a headache. Pasha realized that this could not go on any longer. It's good that the snake, most likely, was not poisonous. Gotta figure it out, once and for all, with a tall stranger. This is the only way to dot the I. Since the pursuer never came close, the guy decided to set a trap for him. Specially looked after the yard a well that does not have a through exit. In case of unforeseen resistance, he took a club with him and dressed in loose clothing that did not restrict movement. On that day, he intentionally led the pursuer as far away from the center as possible. With every meter, he approached the place where everything was supposed to happen. Before entering the courtyard, he quickened his pace, almost running. As soon as he crossed the arch, he quickly darted around the corner and waited. The tall stranger, by inertia, ran forward. Not finding the object of surveillance, he stopped and began to look around in confusion. At this time, Pasha jumped out of his hiding place and pushed a figure in a cloak in the back, pressing him against the wall of the house. He squealed in fright, like a hare caught by a wolf. His eyes widened in horror and he was unable to utter a word. The body of the pursuer was shaking with a slight shiver, and it was clear from everything that he was preparing for death. "Quiet. Do not attract attention," Pavel grumbled, squeezing his protruding Adam's apple with his hand. "Let me go, please." "Just don't kill," the stranger pleaded. In appearance, he was no more than 30, but the wardrobe threw him at least an extra 10 years. "Yes, you are quieter, to whom I speak." "Why should I kill you?" Pasha asked in astonishment. The guy in the raincoat did not answer, but only began to shake even more, as if death itself stood in front of him, with a sharpened scythe and a greedy look. "Why are you following me? Why me? Why do you want to harm me?" Pavel continued to press with anger in his voice. The stranger, hiding his eyes, thought intensely about something. This was evident from the tense face, which reflected his inner feelings and doubts. "I'll tell you everything. But not here. Come to me and you will understand everything," the pale type quietly whispered. "Why should I go with you? Maybe you're crazy and intend to let me in on dumplings?" Pasha asked sarcastically. "To believe or not to believe, it is your right. But, only in this way, you can find out everything. You decide," replied the stranger. Paul hesitated for a moment. What did he have to lose? He was poor as a church mouse and there was nothing to take from him. No family, no parents. Who else needs him, besides this guy in a long raincoat to the toes? He nodded and gave a glance that he agreed. The pale guy led him through some nooks and crannies, winding like a hare leaving the chase. They made their way through some pits and ditches, bypassing fetid heaps of garbage, until they finally found themselves at a dilapidated, outwardly uncomfortable house. Opening the door, the stranger gestured for Pavel to enter first. He smiled as he crossed the threshold. At that very moment, a bag was on his head and strong hands twisted him, knocking him to the floor. There were at least 3 attackers, and Pasha desperately fought back. But the forces were unequal and, soon, the guy was seated on a chair, gagged, bound hand and foot. He looked at the people who captured him. There were indeed 3 of them, along with a pale fellow who had been following him for the past month. The whole company had a haunted burning look, like suicidal fanatics. Dressed, they were in the same dark raincoats, as if only yesterday they were accomplices of Al Capone. The visual duel did not last long. One of the attackers, apparently the oldest, approached the prisoner and, pulling the gag out of his mouth, turned to no one knows whom call the priest. "Let's get started." Pavel, wide-eyed in surprise, exclaimed, "What's going on here? What kind of circus are you running here?" "It's you, scum, we have an expert on this part," the leader answered and laid out a fan of photographs in front of the guy. They depicted people, mostly dead and mutilated. Some committed suicide, others died in a car accident, others, apparently, died of completely natural causes. Peering into the faces, Pavel recognized them as former clients from his home photo studio. There was a silent question on his face. "Look at the creature. He pretends not to understand," the pale type remarked angrily. "What do not I understand? And who are you?" The prisoner shouted indignantly. "And the fact that we've been following you for a long time. Ever since your birth. Who we are, you don't need to know. We are many and together we are strong. You were born on June 6, 1996. Is not it so? Hidden in your date of birth is the code of the devil 666. Your parents died almost immediately after you were born. Since then, death has been following you invisibly, sowing pain and suffering where you appear. We thought we were wrong and that's it, it's a figment of our imagination. But the last check showed that our suspicions are correct. From the savannas of Africa, poachers brought us the black mamba, the most venomous snake on the continent. Its bite causes almost instant death. But you survived and did not even become disabled. Miracles, and nothing more. Most likely, you have not yet gained your full strength and are not aware of everything that is happening. You do not remember those whom you led to death. Therefore, we must act here and now, before it is too late. You are an evil that needs to be destroyed," said the leader. At that moment a priest entered the room with a bucket in his hand. He poured its contents straight onto the seated Paul. He grimaced in displeasure, feeling the liquid sting his skin repulsively, like a small electric charge. Something in him awakened and protested against everything that was happening. The priest began to chant the prayer, raising the tone of his voice with each word. Pavel shifted in his chair and felt incredible strength and power in his hands. The hair on his body stood up. Was this madman right? A monk in a cassock yelled throughout the room. The captive growled terribly and, rolling his eyes, stared at the minister of the church. Pasha pulled himself up and the ropes, one after another, flew with a crash in all directions. In place of the guy's nails, long sharp claws cut through, capable of putting anyone who gets in his way into minced meat. The creature, hitherto dormant in his body, broke free and showed itself in all its glory. The priest's voice broke off in mid-sentence. There was a furious roar and all the windows in the house instantly flew out. The room immediately became cold and the lights went out. Evil, intoxicated by freedom, raged to the fullest. The frantic cries of the inhabitants of the house were heard, probably, throughout the entire district. What exactly happened in the room remained a mystery forever, but when the neighbors opened the door, a stream of blood gushed out from behind the threshold. Inside, it was pitch hell. The remains of people who died a cruel death mixed up in a terrible bacchanalia of horror. It seemed that in this place, at full power, an infernal meat grinder was operating, depriving anyone who touched it of life. On the only section of the wall that was not stained with blood, 666 was inscribed. Along the path leading from the house, a chain of bloody footprints, apparently belonging to one person, was clearly visible. They were lost beyond the yard. The house, which became the arena of death for 3 men and a priest, was burned down by the locals. Now only the ashes, which stand out like a black ulcer against the background of the rest of the city, remind of a terrible tragedy.